Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. And we are so excited because today is our first social emotional wellness workshop series. And we have Christina Johnson here from Care of Southeastern Michigan going to give us a presentation today on tobacco and vaping, the effects of tobacco and vaping. So we are so excited. We're glad you're here. Welcome, Christina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today. So today I really wanted to focus in on vape because I find that more of our students are turning towards vapes and electronic cigarettes rather than traditional cigarettes. But a lot of what we're going to cover today actually applies to both of those categories. I'm from Care of Southeastern Michigan, and what we are really focused on over at Care is preventing and helping folks recover from substance use issues. And that could be something like tobacco or alcohol, or something more severe in the eyes of many of us, such as other Schedule I drugs. But we kind of cover all of it. We work on counseling, prevention, and tons of recovery support groups. So if you have a family member impacted by substance use, I just really highly recommend reaching out to Care and seeing what programs and cool stuff we've got to help you guys through that. So today, like I said, we're really going to focus in on the vapes. And this is a very old school vape. They don't really look like this anymore, but all of them still do have the same components where they have that cartridge that's going to hold the liquid. And those are now refillable or disposable. They have lots of different ways that that can be done. And then they're also going to have the atomizer, which is going to heat everything up. And that's what really turns it into the cloud at that point, from the liquid to the more gaseous state. They have to have a battery so they can operate. Some are rechargeable, some are disposable, where you just throw it out after it's done. And they're all going to create an aerosol. So I'm really going to avoid using the word vapor because it is not a true vapor. It's actually an aerosol. And that vapors are that process of becoming a liquid to a gas. We all know this. We learned it in science class, right? So you're going to have some liquid matter in there, and you're going to have some gaseous matter in there. But what actually comes out of a vape is an aerosol because it has tiny, tiny particulate matter, which is a fancy word for solids. It actually has solid in it, not just a liquid. And those solids are what get trapped inside of our lungs, inside of our airways. And that's what causes a lot of the issues that we see, and we're going to talk about, such as popcorn lung, such as other types of lung injuries, EVALI, and lung-associated injuries. So a lot of teens I speak with, they tell me that they feel that vaping is a safer form of smoking. And I think that this misconception really came about because very early on in the 2000s, 2008 to 2010, a lot of physicians were even recommending that folks maybe try vaping to stop smoking traditional cigarettes. But that came out before we've had time to research it, because now they've been on the market a little over a decade and a half, and we've had more opportunity to study them. So we now know that vapes are not a form of smoking cessation, that vapes, they can do one of two things. A lot of folks will end up using both. If they're trying to stop smoking and they pick up a vape to help with that, they may end up dual using both for some time. And many others will switch completely over to the vape, and then they just become a long-term vapor, but they really haven't cut nicotine out of their lives at all. The CDC recommends only two forms of tobacco cessation products, and they are the gums and the patches. Vaping is not a smoking cessation tool. And we just didn't know that back in the very early days when these products came out on the market. So that's where that confusion kind of came from. But what we're going to see is that in any vape, you're going to find these components in there. They're going to have nicotine, even when they say that they don't, and we've got a slide on that later. They're going to have just ultra fine particulate matter. That's tiny, tiny solids. And that's in every single vape out there on the market, whether it is flavor only, nicotine only, or the marijuana clear pens. They all are going to have that tiny particulate matter that gets trapped in our lungs. All of them have at least 1 to 100 different cancer-causing agents, known human carcinogens. Most of them contain some heavy metals, one of which that we all know really well, even our younger students. We've all heard that lead is extremely dangerous when humans are exposed to it. And a lot of these vapes contain lead. And then we're going to talk, I've got a whole slide on that diacetyl, which is a very interesting chemical component that's inside of our vapes that causes lung cancer. But I just wanted to share this guy. So we can see that we have vapes on the market that claim they have no nicotine in them, all the way up to ones that claim that they have 36 milligrams. Now that's a really wide range. And unfortunately, when we're looking at some of these, they're not always labeled accurately either. For a long time, these were not, the FDA just wasn't involved at all in the regulation of this. So we were finding when they were tested that some of them had more nicotine in them than they were labeled at. And it's kind of hard to determine how much you're even getting. On the next slide, we're going to look at compared to a pack of cigarettes. On average, those always have 20 in them, and you always know how many you've smoked. But with a jewel pod or some of the refillable vape pods, you don't always know how much you've actually consumed in a day. It's a lot harder to keep track of. But when we look at the one that's closest to the average combustible cigarette, it's 18 milligrams of nicotine. And that's kind of in the middle ground, but they have them much, much stronger than an average cigarette. So you're actually consuming more nicotine than you would be if you were a traditional smoker who had first tried a combustible cigarette. And this is just kind of a comparison here. So one of these tiny disposable pods can contain a pack or even 2 entire packs of cigarettes. And we know that a lot of our teens are letting us know that they finish a jewel pod within a day. They finish a jewel pod several times a week. And that lets us know that they're really consuming almost as much as they would, if not more, than picking up one of those traditional packs of cigarettes. They're getting much more nicotine. And nicotine is the one chemical that really sticks out among all the different components that are in vapes, that is the most harmful to the human brain. And it's particularly harmful to the human brain during our developmental phase. Now, looks like I got a lot of parents and educators on the call. So you guys know, back when we were growing up, 18 was that magical age. Everyone was like, yeah, we're an adult at 18. But we've been studying brain development now for a very long time in our country and in many other countries around the world. And what they're finding is that our brain continues developing up until around the age of 25. There have been studies that say anywhere between the age of 22 and 27 is when brain development really stops happening at such an exponential rate. That is when we kind of transition from an adolescent brain to an adult brain that has a lot more of a grip on rationale, decision-making, risk-benefit analysis. All of that really happens up here in the prefrontal cortex, up in the more frontal part of our brain. And like I said, it has to do with a lot of decision-making processes, and it's really the brakes. So our brain develops from the back stem all the way up to the front is kind of the order it goes in, and it starts immediately after conception almost. So we've got our breathing patterns and all those metabolic things that happen in the brain stem. And then kind of the limbic system, that center part of our brain, starts developing after that. And that is all undergoing huge amounts of change all the way up through the teenage years. But that prefrontal cortex, the very front part of our brain that makes decisions and has rationale and pumps the brakes on really emotional situations, isn't fully developed till 25. And nicotine is a huge negative effect on that. It can slow the development. It can shut down different connections that would typically be made in a healthy brain. Because we have pruning and new dendrite formation up until our very last day on this earth. Our brains are kind of continuously going through and picking out what really helps us function and what helps us work. And it does this at extremely fast rate up until around the age of 25. So folks who start any type of nicotine consumption before the age of 25 are going to be at big risks for developmental delays that can harm reading, math, all sorts of decision making that could lead to folks getting in trouble with the law, getting in trouble at school, and things like that. And their brains just aren't completely developed in that way yet. So there are just tons and tons of chemicals in here. When they look at long lists of chemicals that are found in the vape juices or that are created by heating up the vape juices, there's over 400 different chemicals in there, much like we heard about combustible cigarettes back in the 90s. Same, very similar chemicals are in there. And some of the ones that kind of jump out to me are any of the heavy metals, just known to cause human cancer. We know that this causes cancer. Why they're still allowed inside of any commercial product, I just don't know. Anything with a benzene ring as well, we know we can't inhale that. So for you students who have had chemistry already, that's going to be any of these aldehydes, anything that ends in that's going to have some sort of a benzene ring in it, and those we know cause lung cancer. Acetone, we know that that is primarily found in like nail polish removers. We use that stuff every day, and it's really, really irritating when we're breathing it in. Most of us will open up a window, turn on a fan, anything to get away from that smell. But that smell is covered up by some of the other vape flavoring that they add, and we don't realize that we're actually breathing that in still. And it's very dangerous for us. And then that one, where did it go? Diacetyl flavoring is a really interesting story. So we discovered that diacetyl causes lung cancer a couple decades back inside of a popcorn factory. So a factory where they made microwavable popcorn. And what they found was a lot of the factory workers in this popcorn facility, they were coming up with lung cancer and lung injuries. And what they pinned it down to is the butter flavoring that is added to this popcorn. And it's pretty safe to eat. It will not harm you to eat microwave popcorn, right? You can eat quite a bit of it. Some folks eat it every week. But it's the act of inhaling it that pushes it into our lungs, into our system, that is different than ingesting it. And it becomes very, very dangerous to inhale that. And it causes the lungs to look pretty hideous. And I've got a picture of that coming up. So this is a list of a lot of those really dangerous chemicals that are inside of vapes. And you can kind of pop them out. We've got just so many right here that are going to have benzene rings. Got nickel, copper, tin, all these very heavy metals, right? We know we can't have these inside of our body. They cause cancer, and more than just the lungs. They're found in all sorts of other places that we would never think to eat, right? We would never think to inhale these things, right? So we don't have a lot of long-term research. Like I said, these products have really only been on the market for about 10, 15 years. So we don't have decades worth of research on it the way that we do with traditional cigarettes. We've been able to study those very in depth since at least the 70s and before then, really, where we can kind of track that, yes, some people can smoke for 30 years before any type of lung injury happens, and others smoke for only a year or two before they develop lung cancer. But we don't really have that type of data on vaping and electronic cigarettes yet. They just haven't been on the market long enough, and we haven't been studying them long enough to know what happens after 50 years of vaping, the way that we do with some of us even have relatives who smoke traditional cigarettes, and they seem fine. And that's one of the excuses that a lot of young people will share with me is, I know people who have smoked for 30 and 40 years and they've never gotten sick. But this is a completely different way of consuming it than those traditional cigarettes. And they haven't been out on the market long enough for us to study for all those decades that we've been studying traditional cigarettes. So this is that picture of the popcorn lung. And you can kind of see where it gets that name. It comes from the popcorn factory, and then you see all of the splotching going on inside of it. Yeah, it's kind of gross. But for those of you that are educators, we know that this type of a scare tactic teaching, it really doesn't help us make better decisions in the long run, right? Seeing this alone won't really help a youth stop. It won't really help a youth refrain from starting. We need to be able to build up all of those social emotional skills inside of our youth. And we need to foster relationships where they can come to us with these issues, as well as foster a lot of that decision making. And some of it, a youth's brain just is different from an adult's brain, but they are really capable of making great decisions and making a great impact on our communities. So involving youth whenever you can in policy and in the way that your school handles this is going to be essential. They really will speak to each other more than they'll speak to us in some cases. And any youth on the line can tell you that. They're going to be much more likely to go to a peer than to come straight to us, because we have a lot of negative policies where they might get suspended, they might get detentions if they bring it to us for help first. So it's going to be really important to remember that. So a lot of you may have heard of Daniel Ahmed. He is a high schooler in Grosse Pointe, very local to us. And he came down with the EVALI, and he actually ended up having a double lung transplant because his lungs shut down so quickly. But he's not the only one. There are just thousands and thousands of cases. And when we look from January 2020 to January 2021, there were over 2,711 cases of vaping related EVALI, which are the just lung injuries that are caused by vaping. And a large percentage of those, I mean, 15% are under 18. And that's kind of alarming to me because anyone under 18 was never legally allowed to buy these products themselves. And then only 14% of them were using a product that did not contain any THC or marijuana in it. So that kind of set off a red flag for us that the ones that contain THC, or the marijuana clear pens, as they're quite often called, those ones cause more lung injuries than traditional cigarettes do, than vapes and e-cigarettes that just have nicotine or that are just the flavoring. So we know that the ones that contain THC are causing more lung injuries than ones that don't. Again, we just don't have enough science on it yet. We really need to study it for longer. And in an ethical way, it's a tough thing to study because you have to study folks who have already picked up the habit. You can't induce the habit and then study it. It's unethical. So we kind of have to wait for folks to pop up in emergency rooms, you know, presenting with these and see how long they had been vaping for. It's just a very difficult thing to study. So most of the time it starts off very gradual. When EVALI is developing, you might think you just have a cold. And especially during this crazy COVID time, we might be thinking it's something related to COVID, or, you know, I have asthma, it's just asthma. And it's kind of easy to dismiss symptoms like that, or even just vomiting. Oh, I ate something bad. And you will dismiss those symptoms. And that's why folks are coming in with such late term issues where it leads to things like a lung transplant or being put on ventilators for long periods of time, because we don't always notice these smaller symptoms as quickly, or we might dismiss them. So that's why when you go into your doctor, any students, even if you haven't shared with your parents yet, when your doctor asks you about your history of smoking or vaping, it's very important to be just honest and say, yes, this is what I use. This is the product name I use. This is how often I've been using it for how long. Because then they can use that information to determine if something like a small vomiting and diarrhea is actually related to the vaping. That we wouldn't normally associate that with. The doctor really needs to have a full picture of your medical history. So you can always ask your parent to leave the room to share that honestly with your doctor. Your doctor will probably support that. Typically in Michigan, anyone above 14 can privately consult with their doctor. So it's really important to be honest if something like this is happening so that your doctor can help you. And I can't say enough that you should probably tell your parents. But if you're really struggling telling your guardian, at least be honest with the doctor. Like I said, these clear pens, these ones that contain marijuana, we're finding that they're very, very bad for us, and they're causing a lot more of the lung injuries. And one of the reasons that is they're adding this, it's like a vitamin E concentrate that they're adding. And again, vitamin E is great. You can eat it, you can absorb it topically on your skin in lotions and things like that. But inhaling it is detrimental to our lungs. There are lots of things like that that are natural in the world that we can consume in one way, but not in others without them being dangerous. So a lot of kids will ask me about medicinal marijuana at this point. And I personally just have to say that while I do support, I have family that are on medicinal CBD and things like that, this is a completely different thing than that. It's not a medical route of administration. So vaping it is never going to be a way to take marijuana medicinally. Your doctor will never prescribe you to smoke or vape marijuana to consume it medicinally. That is a huge part to just point out. And if you're under 25, even those medical routes of administration are probably going to give you more risks than taking a different form of medication. Because our brains are not developed until around 25, and marijuana is extremely dangerous to that developing brain. And we're talking about that Thursday, so please come back Thursday if you want to hear more on this topic. But because our brains aren't fully developed, that's not a great medicinal choice for us. It would probably be much more beneficial for us to take a different type of medication. So we'll talk a lot about that on Thursday, so I won't go too much further. But if you're under 25, it's probably not the best medicine for you. And vaping is never a medicinal route of taking that type of product or medicine. So they do present in much the same way that other types of lung injuries present. So it's important to tell your doctor, which type of vape you were consuming so that they can kind of really pin that down and help you faster. Because a lot of the side effects and symptoms are going to look very similar. You're going to have coughing, chest pain, very likely to have nausea, vomiting, and gastro upsets as well. But if they don't know if you were having clear pens or cotton candy flavoring, it's going to change the way that they treat you. So it's very important to be honest about this. So we were luckily able to change this law in Michigan through Tobacco 21. And that's only been about a year. You used to be able to purchase any type of tobacco-related product at 18 and above. And in our state, we were able to push this and get it to 21. And what the hope for that was is that we're just getting those kids a little bit closer to that fully developed brain before they're allowed to buy these types of substances. Is it enough? In my opinion, no. I'd say we should push it all the way to the 25. But again, policy is behind science. So maybe we'll see that. Maybe some of us can get active and speak out on that. But what we saw in response to this was that the vape companies and the folks who make these vape pens, they went through a few loopholes. And one of them was changing the flavoring. We've gone back and forth on flavor bans in the state of Michigan. And we'll talk all about flavors and how they market those in a few slides. But the flavor ban came up for refillable pods. So then we saw them come out with Mr. Vapor and Puff bars that are disposable flavoring. And they kind of went through a loophole like that. And policy has been going back and forth, finding ways that we can shut down all of the little loopholes that they have found to sell their products to folks who are underage. Most of you guys know that if you're caught with a vape at school, you're going to get in trouble. But I think a lot of folks don't know that being caught with like a THC clear pen on a college campus is enough for you to lose your scholarships, because you'll be in violation of the drug-free college campuses federal laws that we have. So in the state of Michigan, those little THC pods, they're legal to buy in stores that can products, but it is still illegal to have it in your possession if you're going to college, whether or not you're on the college campus. You can actually be kicked out of school, have to pay back all of your Pell Grant monies, which are monies that you might have through the federal government. It's one of the biggest ways that you can get grants to go to school. And if you're caught with one of those, it's enough to have you have to pay back all of those, get you kicked out of your classes. So it can really have a lot of consequences in our lives. And we need to really be cognizant of that. Is the choice I'm making today going to affect me for 5 years? Is the choice I'm going to make today going to affect the rest of my life? And if you can answer yes to that, you probably need to talk to a few more people before you make that choice. Your parents, your teachers, anyone in your life that you can trust in that way. Talk it through and walk yourself through the decision-making process. I really, really highly recommend getting involved with at least one teacher or coach that you know you can trust, and make sure that your parents are aware that you're doing that and trying to seek that mentorship. But it's really a great protective factor that you can go to an adult that's not necessarily always your parent, and share those really vulnerable things with. Because when we only rely on peers, we're going to get a skewed view. A lot of times our best friend is just going to agree with us. What we really need is someone in our corner that believes in our abilities, but will say, hey, that wasn't great. You messed up there. What can I do to support you in correcting it? And be honest with us, because our peers are just going to agree with us, right? Yeah, your mom was being a jerk. She wasn't letting you go to that party. But if you talk to an adult, they're going to have another perspective and be able to see your perspective as well as your parents, and kind of walk you through how they may have came to that, and that they're not indeed a jerk. They're looking out for you. So the next few slides, we're going to go into how the tobacco industry is really targeting you guys. You teens are their target. You are who they want to be their customer now and forever. That's their hope. So we kind of see this really old Camel's ad from a long while back. And we kind of see coming up here, just 2015, the same ads are really being put out there. They're claiming that doctors support these. They're claiming that doctors think that they are a great smoking cessation tool, that you can actually quit smoking by trying these. And they put these types of ads out, and they actually can fool people with this and pull a fast one. But if we look at it, know that the same people who make Camel are now making Blue. They just have a new product out, and they're using the same marketing scheme to trick us into thinking that it's okay. So again, teens, this is really targeting you. Would your parent buy vanilla cupcake flavored vapes? Probably not. We know that these products are specifically made in these types of packaging to attract youth. And it's just so sad to think about the way that they have stolen some of these other brands' logos, other brands' writing and colors. They're using cartoon characters that we identify with and that we know from our childhood and love. And it's all just a marketing scheme to make it more attractive to you guys, to you teens. And you know, we're just kind of looking at the trends in this and some of the marketing. So this guy down at the bottom, High Voltage, they're actually being sued right now by Red Bull for stealing their logo. And you can see the resemblance. But again, all of this was a ploy to get folks that drink Red Bull, who are predominantly under 25, to maybe want to try this product. It looks so familiar, I can't place it. You know, it looks like it might be something I like. And that's why they steal those colors and logos to trick us into doing it. And when we look at even pictures like this one down here, this was on the Views Facebook page, is where this like originally came from. But if you look at the bracelets these girls are wearing, these have got to be teens. I don't know anyone over 30 who wears bracelets like this anymore myself. Maybe you guys do. But for the most part, we're all knowing that's probably a teen's hand, and they're passing it to another teen and they're sharing it in that way. And that brings into a whole nother issue, because we know that if we're sharing something that goes inside of our mouths, we could be sharing other germs like COVID-19. We could be sharing meningitis, which is just very, very contagious. Maybe not as much as COVID-19, but extremely contagious. And if our friend has any of those germs, even if they're asymptomatic, it could be on the end of that jewel pod that now we are putting in our mouths, and we're getting those other germs as well. So it's just something to think about whenever you're sharing anything. You know, I love my friend, I trust them, but they might have germs that they don't even know they have. They might be infected with something they don't even know that they have. This guy over here is a reverse campaign, right? So they are trying to reverse that marketing. And what we see here is that it's 4 out of 5 kids who have used tobacco started with a flavored product. And that means they were intentionally trying not to use nicotine. They were like, yeah, I heard nicotine is bad for me, so I'm going to try just cotton candy. Cotton candy can't be bad for me, right? I can eat that and it's okay. But they start out on these tobacco products that claim to only have flavoring in them. And then quite often they progress to ones that do have nicotine in them. And we also know from when the FDA got involved and started researching and mandating the labels on these, that a lot of them that were labeled as nicotine-free had small amounts of nicotine in them, but it was below that like 1 milligram that they could legally still put on the package that it has done, even though it has just a tiny amount. This one is a little bit older, but it just kind of shows that that jump that our society is making from things like cigarettes, cigars, and hookahs up through to the newer generation of tobacco products that are electronic in nature. They're vapes, they're e-cigarettes, they're things like that. So the bars here are from 2013 and 2014, and it's just the percentage of teens that have claimed that they have used it during a year span. So this one's from the CDC, and it kind of shows us that we were, in 2013, under 5% of teens had tried it. But just a year later, we were at about 13% of teens had tried it. And that's just for the vape. And it also kind of shows us that teens are a little bit more likely to try these types of products compared to picking up cigarettes and cigars and things like that. So that switch happened around 2013 to 2014 when these products came out on the market. And we really do see that a lot more folks who are starting to use electronic cigarettes are our younger generations, our high school and college students. So this one really looks at middle school and high school. And we'll see middle school is still pretty low. Thank golly, we're just now hitting about 10% have ever tried using it. To me, 10% though is still really scary, because when we think about middle school, you guys are really the youngest, right? You're very young, your brains are not quite developed yet, your lungs are going to be more at risk, your brain's going to be more at risk for developmental delays and illnesses. And then when we look at our high school students, it's pushing up there. We're at 27.5% have ever tried using this. So it's quite a bit. And then when we look at adults, so we were at, sorry, just to go back, 27.5 for high schools. And then when we look at adults, it's so low. We are under 10% on all of these categories. The young adults, those college students, have the higher rate at 7.6. But us folks that are in our middle ages, we're between 2 and 4%. We're very unlikely to pick up the vape product compared to our younger folks. For us, usually once you hit that stage, it's pretty unlikely that you would pick up a habit like tobacco. Because you've hit that point where your brain is developed, you've got those good decision-making skills. And if you haven't picked it up by that age, you're unlikely to. But if you do, you're more likely to turn towards traditional cigarettes or hookah than to pick up an electronic cigarette. So I would love to, are there any students that want to chime in on this slide? Hands, okay. So this one I believe is from 2018, this top guy, and then the bottom one is 2015. So when we were asking students, why did you try that? What led you to decide you were going to try a vape or an electronic cigarette? And a lot of them are just curious. They didn't think through that decision further than, I want to find out what it tastes like. I want to find out what it feels like. Quite a few others were saying that, the flavors were what really enticed me. They looked delicious. It says it tastes like cotton candy. I want to see if it actually tastes like cotton candy. Some students were saying they were just bored. They were trying to find something they can do with their hands. And as we see with things like fidget spinners, it actually is kind of calming to have something in your hand you're fiddling with. And a lot of folks will turn to a negative way to hold on to stuff. And a lot of smokers will say similar things, like just feeling it in my hand was something that calmed me. So some of our older smokers also help us look at that way that we feel different when we're holding something in our hand, and the ways that it can help affect the way that we quit. So I know a lot of folks who are using like patches or gum, they still might have something in their hand to replace that feeling of having the cigarette in their hand. So that might be something, if you're working with a teen on, maybe they need a couple of fidget spinners to kind of replace that. And every time they're thinking about it, pull out the fidget spinner and do that instead. A lot of folks think that smoking is a way to relieve tension. And we see that even in our teens, they're saying, I heard that it could help relieve tension and stress, so I'm going to try it to relieve some of my stress. And then some of them are also saying, I just wanted to have fun with my friends. So all my friends were doing it. I thought I'd try it too. I was there at the time they were doing it. It looked fun. And I'd love if any students wanted to chime in on that. Are you seeing your friends doing this, and how does it impact the choices that you're making? We have mostly adults on anywho, so can go ahead and move on. So now kind of the question is, well, we know what's making them start, but what products are they really gravitating towards? And we are seeing that a lot of folks are really coming towards nicotine, right? The 12th graders, astonishingly so. And then some folks are, again, trying the hash and the marijuana, the THC clear pens, they're quite often called. And then a pretty high amount from all grade levels, we're really gravitating towards the flavoring ones, the ones that say they taste like Fruity Pebbles cereal, the ones that say they taste like peaches or something like that. That's very sweet. So when we're kind of looking at the past year vaping, we're seeing that 17.6% of our 8th graders. It's a lot. And when we look at those differences from even just a year ago, compared to some of that data we looked at from 2013 and 14, we're seeing these are pretty big jumps. 32% of 10th graders had done at least once in the past year. 37.3% of 12th graders, again, in the past year had tried vaping. And that one is kind of sitting a little more stagnant. It hasn't jumped up a lot compared to the year before and in some of those earlier years. But that middle school one is a huge jump, right? 8th grade is that last year of middle school. That's a really big jump for just a year to look at that. So nearly 2 in 5 students in the 12th grade had self-reported that they had vaped in the past year. And it really leads us to question not just lung health, but that brain development piece, because all of these folks are going to be at very high risk for developmental delays. And we're also at a much higher risk of addiction when we're under the age of 25. And indeed, so under the age of 18, we're at an extremely high risk of addiction because our hierarchy of needs really hasn't been set in stone yet. Our brains are just developing so rapidly. It's a lot easier for us to fall into those patterns and into those habits than once we have the adult brain that's a little bit more rigid in the way that it thinks, in the way that it forms habits. I'm really hoping my video works. If not, I'll pull it up on the web. So just give me a few big old thumbs up if it starts working really well. This video is really great for teachers and parents. So if that's you, you might really like this.
Working great, Christina. Wow.
Yeah, so that's one that I had actually seen in a training when I first started at CARE. And I was just utterly shocked because before coming to CARE, I was working with the Y and I was working in a middle school setting. And it just made me think, how many times have I seen the inside of some kiddo's pencil case, right? And wouldn't have thought anything about the contents that I was seeing inside of there. It wouldn't have risen any alarm. And many of us that are parents of teens, we might see the same thing and not even realize that that's what we're looking at. So it's important to kind of talk with your kids about that, be they your own children or your students, because if you do bring something like that into the school, there's going to be consequences, and we will find out. Even if it looks like a marker, we're on the lookout. We will find out, and we don't want you to get in trouble. We don't want you to be penalized, but it is something that we need to take action on, and we will take action on. So a lot of us teachers, we don't want to turn you in, but we will, because that's what will help you quit, and that's what will help ensure that you don't bring anything else into school that might end up getting you expelled. So it's really important to talk with our kiddos about what's inside their bags, what are they bringing into the school building whenever we're back inside of school building. So we're going to really wrap up today with kind of just talking about what we can do as an individual, as a teenager, and as the family and as the community around these teens. So for the teens themselves, action steps that they can take is to get close to an adult. It can be a coach, it can be a pastor, it can be your parent, anyone that's in your circle that you really trust. Build a mentor type relationship with them, seek that out. Ask them, can you be my mentor? Can I come to you with some of these problems? And build some of those really close relationships. It's a huge protective factor for you in many areas of your life to help you get to your goals faster, with less stress, with someone that you can turn to with all of those emotions that might be bottling up inside of us. Get involved in an activity. It doesn't have to be sports. Sports are awesome because they impact our health in a couple of different ways. So there's belonging to the community that is your team, and then of course all the physical activity that goes into it. So sports are a great one, but it doesn't have to be a sport. If you want to join a book club or chess team or comic book club, anything where you're building that community and you're being able to be around your peers and have those great relationships is what's going to kind of help foster that positive experience in your life, foster health and good decision making in your life. So it doesn't have to be a sport, just get involved with something, anything in your community that really sparks your interest. It's a big protective factor for you, for more than just substance use as well, for all types of health related things. It helps us tremendously to be involved with groups. Positive self-esteem. And again, a great way to build that is to have positive relationships with adults and peers. And to think back to past memories where we have been successful and let those kind of dictate the way that we form our self-image, versus really focusing on all of our failures and being hypercritical all the time. Our brains will get into patterns where we repeat those thoughts over and over again, because we're forming those new connections between structures in our brains called dendrites. So the more positive connections you have with others, and the more that you focus on your own gratitude and your own successes, the more likely you're going to be able to lead a healthy life. So more than just avoiding using substances, but truly leading a healthy life. Positive self-esteem is a huge part of that. And then school success. So I'd say that's kind of something the family really should also be involved in, and you guys as educators want to be tracking as well, because positive school success is one of those just number one indicators of success as an adult. So whether you're a teen and you're like, gosh, I know I got to buckle down, or you're an educator going, how can I get them to buckle down? We know that this is a really important goal and we can't give up on it. No matter where they are, they can still achieve some level of success and help that build their self-esteem and their skills to go into the workplace and into their lives. As a family, you really want to foster strong bonds. And I think the best way that you can do that is through conversations. So a lot of us, and I am a parent for those of you that are wondering, but it's really hard to have these conversations and not feel like I need to step in and take action. But the best thing you can do is allow yourself to be calm, step back from it, and listen. Because when we're jumping in and trying to fix everything, we miss a lot of their messaging and we miss a lot of what they're really trying to share with us. And we could cause them to not come back to us with their issues because we react very negatively. Like, I can't tell her, she's just going to ground me and yell at me and then ignore my issue. But if we avoid responding with those on the get-go, we can get them to share a lot more with us and get a better picture of the story and form that tight bond where they can trust us and they will come back to us with their issues. Just be involved. It doesn't mean helicopter over everything that they do every day, but ask them, how's school going? How's soccer going? How are you feeling about this? And then pause and let them tell you. That's the biggest thing, is really listen to what they're saying and have that open dialogue, instead of trying to get at one answer that you really want and then jumping all over them about that one answer that you probably didn't really want to hear and they really didn't want to tell you. So it's tough to allow them that space to share something that we're very critical and protective about. But that's the first step, is stepping back from the situation and saying, the end goal is a stronger bond with my child. The end goal is my child to be healthy as an adult. The end goal isn't grounding them for next week, right? Your end goal is positive communication throughout their lives. So focusing on that will allow you to shut down some of the other anger that you might be feeling so that you can really listen to what they have to say. Of course, we do have to have limits, and those limits need to be very clear. So for vaping, tobacco, marijuana, in my household, it's a zero tolerance policy, and there will be these consequences. So figure out ahead of time with your spouse or whoever your co-parenter might be, what are our consequences going to be if we find this? And then communicate those clear limits to your children. And same thing with schools. So, I'm really hoping we're coming away from some of the just suspension, expulsion responses and coming up with some better alternatives. But whatever your response is, it needs to be told to the students. You will be suspended if you're caught with this in school. You will have to go to this drug education class if you're caught with this. You'll have to do these X amount of community service hours if you're caught with this. And spell it out in very plain language so that they know exactly what the limits are and what the consequences are going to be. And all of that kind of comes back to communication, building the strong bond, telling them what the limits are. These are all just conversations that you're having, and they can have very positive tones. They can be coming from a place of a growth mindset, letting them know this is what's happening. This is how we're going to keep developing our relationship. So for any teens on the call, finding a hobby is huge. It doesn't always have to be a sport or a club that's very formal. It can be a hobby that you do independently or a hobby that you do with just one other friend. It's very important to find some outlets for our stress. Stress doesn't go away. In fact, stress is healthy for us to have a little bit in our lives. We'll cover that a little bit later on in the series. The difference between eustress and de-stress. But some level of stress is always going to be present in your life, and you have to find a way to cope with it. For a lot of us, it's music, art, writing, exercise, sports, theater, just going on long nature walks, right? There's a ton of ideas listed up there, and there's hundreds and hundreds more. Whatever your coping skill is, your go-to thing to help you decompress from the day. Could be writing in a journal, be coloring a detailed coloring sheet. Whatever it is, find out what works best for you and keep implementing it in your life in both a planned way, like, hey, every Friday I'm gonna decompress and do this sport. And then on the fly as well. So if I start feeling triggered and very upset, what coping skill can I jump to quickly? And kind of calm down from that stress. So it's important to plan in things that help us stay healthy, but also have some little go-to ones that we can do on the fly. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Couple weeks into the series, we're going to focus on coping skills, and we'll talk about some meditations and things you can do that only take a minute to kind of calm yourself back down. But it's just so important to figure out which ones work for you. Because meditation doesn't work for everybody. So if you've got meditation in your back pocket and it doesn't work for you, it's really not going to calm you. It's not going to be effective. So you want to figure out which ones work for you and your kids. Even between kids, they might have totally different opinions on that. So, we're all going to go to this family dinner might cause a lot of stress for one child, where it actually helps the other student calm down And you've got to figure out, ways to balance that in your home if you've got more than one kiddo and they all need different things at different times. So all of these things that we've been talking about with coping skills, it really fosters resilience. And resilience is just that bounce back ability, that ability to say, yeah, things suck, but how can I grow from it?
Yeah.
This is really hard, but I'm going to keep growing and having that growth mindset that a lot of our educators, we're pushing that pretty hard in our elementary schools right now is fostering resilience. And the best way that we can do that is to give our teens autonomy. Just because their brains aren't completely developed yet doesn't mean that they don't have amazing ideas and a lot of great leadership skills to start implementing those in their own lives and in their community. So give them that freedom to do them. Give them that freedom to take an idea from, a mind map into actually implementing a community-wide thing. I have had the privilege of working with a lot of teens in our leadership camps and in our T3, Teens Talking Truth. And they have just magical ideas I would have never thought about in terms of getting community support and fostering activism in our communities. They have a lot of great ideas, so give them that freedom to develop them. We don't have to always be on top of them, checking in on everything that they're doing. They need a tiny bit of autonomy to make some of those decisions and practice decision-making skills on their own. We really want to build up social competence. And again, the best way of doing that is through communication. This kind of comes about with the IQ versus EQ, right? We want our students and our youth to be able to communicate their ideas, but also to seek first to understand rather than to be understood. We want them to be able to pick up on emotional cues of others and see what's happening in the room, and be able to have empathy for others, even if they're nothing like them, and even if they completely disagree with their viewpoint. A lot of what's going on today in the world, could be avoided with some empathy. And if we can foster that in our youth, maybe 20 years from now, we won't be living in a world that has as much upsets as we're currently experiencing. There'll be a lot more understanding, and we can pick up on social cues and communication things that happen with social competence. Problem solving, again, right back to autonomy. They need to be able to work through those problems on their own and build their confidence in doing so. So let them solve some problems. Give them the freedom to try, even if they fail. They need the freedom to try. And then this is true for all of us, not just our teens. Every human in the world needs to feel a sense of hope that the future is going to be good, a sense of purpose and belonging, that they have something to contribute to this world and something to contribute that will make society better. And every one of our students has this. They just maybe haven't found it yet. Took me till probably about 30 to find it. A lot of us go through that, right? And sometimes our purpose changes throughout our lives. So helping them explore those ideas and figure out what their purpose is going to be very important. And then the community protective factors. So again, we really want to focus on changing these laws and holding our retailers accountable. Tobacco 21 has passed. They cannot legally be selling to folks that are under 21. And we really want to push that. We want to change the marketing and the way that they're advertising. And we can all affect change on that if we get out and vote and speak up for what we want to see in our communities. This is one for teens that I'd love to do another time, Toni, with a smaller teen group and just talk about ways we can say no.
Absolutely.
But something that you really want to do with your kiddos, be there your own or a student, is do some positive rehearsals. Help them figure out exactly what they're going to say if they're in that moment. Because it is very hard to tell a friend no, even if it's something that isn't good for us, right? We want our peers to accept us. So it's really important to say, to say no in a way that kind of gives them a way that they can escape the situation without looking uncool, and to have what they're going to say in their head already ready to go. And then I'd also add, I don't have it on the slide, but oh, I do, having a safe word. So if your kiddo's at a party, they can text you spaghetti, and you'll come pick them up, no questions asked. I will come get you. Do not worry, nothing will happen. I'm going to come get you and get you out of there. But it also, because a lot of our teens look at each other's phones a lot, and they're really hypercritical of all of that, if they just text their mom spaghetti, there's no uncool. There's no, he's the one who ratted us out. He's the one who got parents or the cops involved. Having a code word is a great thing to do. These are all programs we offer at CARE. We're running out of time, and I'll be here for a few months. So any questions you have about these programs, let me know. And I can help get you connected with who leads them at CARE, and help get your student into them if you need to. But I did just want to end on one more video that I think should fill up our last 2 minutes. And it's that lovely teen from Grosse Pointe, who is sharing his story and how vaping affected him.
Our GMA cover story now, a teenager who underwent a double lung transplant after vaping is now telling his story as a warning to others. Paula Ferris sat down with him, and this is quite a story. Good morning, Paula.
Quite a story he has. Good morning, Robin. Good morning, everyone. Daniel Ahmed was a healthy high school student who loved to sail, swim, and run. Then he started vaping. His doctors say his lungs were destroyed beyond repair. This morning, 17-year-old Daniel Ahmed is recovering from a double lung transplant, believed to be the first related to vaping. About how often were you vaping?
Maybe a few times during the day, but like at lunchtime if I was with people, but it would only be like hitting it once.
Do you buy the vaping pens?
I never bought one. It started off just whenever I'd be with my friends on the weekends, I would just hit theirs.
He began vaping in December of 2018 using mainly flavored cartridges and occasional THC pods. And in early September, he started feeling ill.
I had a really bad headache. That was my main thing. And I just felt really sick.
His mom, Tammy, had an idea the illness was vaping related.
On the way to the hospital, I said, are we still going with the fact that you've never vaped or you don't vape? And he said, maybe.
Daniel didn't come clean until he was admitted to the hospital.
It's really frustrating. And I know that the kids, I think they cover for each other.
Once in the hospital, he rapidly declined and was put on life support for 29 days. When they're telling you what happened and that you were days from dying.
Yeah, that still hasn't really processed yet. It's really hard to believe that that happened, but everyone's told me that one day they just said he has a 10% chance to live.
On October 15th, after doctors told his family death was imminent, Daniel was given a double lung transplant. In these dramatic before and afters he shared with us, Daniel's lost over 40 pounds. He showed us the surgery scars on his neck and across his chest. When the doctors told you that this was because of vaping, you were skeptical.
Yeah, I didn't really believe it at first. It just didn't make sense because why didn't it happen to other people that had been vaping for years? Why didn't it happen to someone else close to me that I was hitting their stuff? So how did the chemicals affect me and not them?
This is your new normal. He says while he is grateful to be alive, his new life is forever altered.
Like I have to take over 20 medications a day. I have to wear a mask in public for at least a year. I can't travel for a year. Opportunities that I would have had before, like going in the military, I can't do that anymore.
You feel like you've been given a second chance?
Yeah, for sure. And I want to make the most out of that and make sure no one else makes the same mistakes I did.
And Daniel's lifelong dream of being a Navy SEAL won't happen now because of the transplant, but he's using his voice. He's launched a nonprofit called Fight for Wellness. He wants to advocate for other youth in the country to warn them about the dangers of vaping. But, you know, so often teens are lying to their parents about it. He lied to his parents until they got to the ER, but they'll talk to one another about it.
Oh, and hopefully they're going to be listening to him.
Yes.
And his message.
As you say, take your mess.
Make your mess your message.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
he's doing just that.
Yep.
All right, Paula, thank you very much. Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here.
So just a very local story of a teen touched by this who wasn't even purchasing them for himself. It was very casually hitting a friend's at lunchtime, and it was enough to cause this to happen to him. So thanks so much for all your time today.
Before you
And if
go,
you,
Christina, I
yeah,
want to ask this question. You know how, with regards to cigarette smoking, secondhand smoke is equally as harmful? Are the plumes from vaping the same way? So if you're
yeah.
in a room
So
with someone doing it, you can be equally affected?
yeah, you're definitely being exposed to all of the same chemicals. A lot of those are going to still come out in that exhale. So it's just as dangerous as secondhand tobacco smoke because it really is still tobacco smoke. It's still full of nicotine. It's still full of all those harmful chemicals. And they've also been doing some research on what they're now calling third hand smoke. And what this is it's true for traditional cigarettes as well as vapes. I think a lot of us have probably experienced it. What happens is when there's a lot of those plumes, a lot of those exhales in a room or in one environment over and over and over again, a film actually builds up on materials in that room. Some of us have walked into a friend's home who smokes in their home, and it immediately hits us like, oh my gosh, I smell it. I can tell it's here. Or we get in someone's car where they smoke in their car. And that's called third hand smoke. And it can actually be really dangerous to our pets and to very young children to be around second and third hand smoke. So it's just another way that we want to share with parents that they need to try quitting or at least taking it outside so that they're not smoking around very young children and having that smoke land on materials, even the floor in your home, where the kid is going to then be walking, playing, rolling through it. And our pets, same thing, they roll on the floor, they're picking all that up. And a lot of us have probably met someone where they literally smell like they've just been smoking. Their clothing smells that way, their pet might smell that way. But they haven't been. It's maybe been a few hours. They just smoke so regularly around their clothing and around themselves that that smell is lingering because a lot of those materials have stuck to it and it creates a film on it.
Wow, that is very eye-opening. Anybody else have any questions before we go?
Is there anything in the chat? Let me check there. So much in the chat. Well, thank you guys. Yeah, there definitely is a black market in some of the high schools I've visited and even in the middle schools where someone has an older sibling or older cousin, they get a hold of a bunch of them and then they do start selling it at their schools. Yeah, so I haven't heard of any cases where there's actually a prescription to consume medicinal marijuana through vaping. It's not a means of taking it medicinally. A lot of our traditional prescriptions for medical marijuana are indeed an oral way of taking it, be it those gummies and baked goods that we see, or droplets of the concentrate. And then in some cases, we're seeing like CBD being used in topical ways to help with like joint pain. And there is some science showing that that is positive and that it does work and helps folks with that joint pain. But again, CBD doesn't get us high. We're not smoking it just by itself. So it's a different route of administration entirely. So I just haven't heard of any cases that someone has been prescribed a vape to consume medical marijuana, and it's just not a route of medical administration. Yeah, so nicotine absolutely makes you addicted. It's a very addictive component. And there have been various studies that have come out proving that nicotine is more addictive than like cocaine and methamphetamines and things that we very typically think of as super addictive. And nicotine, we kind of reserve this gentler spot for in our mind. but it's actually one of the most addictive components that is available on the market today. Much more addictive than we think, much more addictive than alcohol. When we're very young, we're very susceptible to forming new habits and new addictions. Thanks so much, guys. Lots of positive stuff here. So lots of names. Thank you guys so much. I think that was all the questions I see in the chat. Yep, awesome. Well, have a great day, everybody. And again, thanks for making so much time in the middle of your day to help our youth fight this.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will see you on Thursday at 2 o'clock. We will be talking about marijuana.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
Bye
Thank you.
now.